Every day, my inbox is full of idiot trolls, always making the same stupid arguments. And I can't just ignore them all, but I can't waste all my time answering them all one at a time either. So when I see a dumb argument that is repeated so often that it's worthy of a public response, I'll make a video about it.
Free thinkers. Man can initiate thoughts and actions. They are not merely the result of deterministic laws of brain chemistry.
If our thoughts and actions are according to the conditions of our brain chemistry, and they evidently are, then there's no reason why we cannot initiate these the way neuroscientists say we can. However, creationists are seldom brain surgeons. Well, to be fair, one of them is, but he serves as a better example for my position than theirs. No, creationists are mystics who don't like reality all that much. They would rather make believe that our thoughts come from a supernatural source, like a literal ghost in a biological machine, even though believers can't even show that that is a possibility to consider. There's no support for this notion of mind-body dualism, neither in philosophy nor in neuroscience, where there is actually considerable evidence against the notion of a supernatural or immaterial soul, with every indication that our minds are entirely physical, electrochemical synapses. Our bodies are not vehicles that we drive around. We can't get out and become pedestrians. We can't get into a different body and drive that one around. Neuroscience shows that every aspect of our personality and our identity is an inextricable product of our physical form.
This is a deduction from the biblical teaching that man has both a material and immaterial aspect, e.g., Genesis 35:18, 1 Kings 17:21 through 22, Matthew 10:28.
This is a misunderstanding of the text and its history, the inspiration and origins of it, and that of the cultures who composed these stories, as well as those who later adopted and adapted some of them to new cultures and interpretations. Genesis 2:7, for example, says that God created the first man by way of a golem spell, that God sculpted a clay figurine and breathed into it the breath of life. Thus, Adam, the mythical first man, became a living soul. He did not get a soul, he became a soul by receiving the breath of life, which was then believed to be an animating spirit, because people back then had no idea about biochemistry. They thought that the reason anything lives is because of an animating spirit, and that anything can live if it is so enchanted. Now we know better.
This immaterial aspect of man means that he is more than matter, so his thoughts are likewise not bound by the makeup of his brain.
There is no immaterial aspect of man, though that was once a common belief because it was a time when people didn't know that air was particulate matter, but they knew that you would die if you couldn't breathe. So they thought that air was spirit. They saw how the clouds move, including oncoming storms, so they thought that the movement of air was the Spirit of God. The Bible describes how the wind is the Spirit of God moving over the waters, while the Quran says that the Spirit of God fills the sails of men's ships. So they believed that the movement of air was spiritual. If you sneezed, they would bless you because of the spirit leaving your body. If someone else got sick because you sneezed, that was them being possessed by evil spirits that left your body. When they sacrificed burnt offerings, they saw the smoke rise into the air and then disappear into evanescence. So they thought it was being received by some entity on the other side. And whenever they saw dust devils, they thought they were literally devils, appearing out of nowhere, throwing their stuff everywhere, and then vanishing again. And this helped develop the notion of genies and other spirits living in some other realm that was inaccessible to humans. And it gave people the idea that they had an immaterial spirit inside of them, too, which they came to call a soul. Then, generations later, their folklore proposed different understandings of the spiritual world, like what your soul would look like, like a transparent version of yourself with clothes and everything. So that when people began to understand what air really is, they had already disassociated that from their developing notions of spirituality, not realizing or remembering that air was the inspiration for their belief in spirits in the first place.
But if materialism were true, then thought is just an epiphenomenon of the brain and the results of the laws of chemistry.
Materialism is not a belief like mysticism is. Materialism is just recognizing that there is a natural world and not also assuming anything more than that, like believers do. But believers like to try and shift the burden of proof to turn unbelief in the supernatural into a positive belief in the non existence of the supernatural. And they do this because they know that they don't have any actual factual evidence nor logically valid arguments on their side, nothing that supports their position. And they know that the burden of proof would be on them to substantiate their claims. But they're determined to make believe what they already know is not evidently true and that they can't substantiate what they want to pretend. They know that mysticism, that's supernaturalism, spiritualism, belief in magic, is indefensible. And they also know that it is logically more difficult, if not impossible, to prove a negative. So they commit the fallacy of shifting the burden of proof to pretend as if materialism is the belief that needs to be substantiated and defended, as if their own assumption of supernatural nonsense is somehow the default position, unless conclusively disproved.
Thus, given their own presuppositions, materialists have not freely arrived at their conclusion that materialism is true, because their conclusion was predetermined by brain chemistry.
Our non belief in magic is not a presupposition like their belief in magic is. Most of us were indoctrinated and inculcated as children, fed lies and nonsense in order to convince us to believe. But rather than accept those presuppositions, some of us retained the ability to evaluate what we were being told, to test it, and find that it is not but empty, unsupported assumptions of impossible absurdity, dishonestly asserted as if it was a matter of fact. Evaluating a position and finding insufficient reason to believe it is the very opposite of a presupposition. Believers only accuse us of presupposition because all they can do is project their own faults onto us, such that their every accusation is a confession.
But then, why should their brain chemistry be trusted over mine, since both obey the same infallible laws of chemistry?
That's a good question. That's why I wanted to make a video to respond to this. Given that both of us, believers and unbelievers alike, have similar brain chemistry, then the only significant difference between us is that unbelievers prefer to follow the scientific method, which means questioning our assumptions and testing them to see whether there is sufficient reason to hold that position, and to see where the corrections need be made. Because if we want to improve our understanding, well, the only way to do that is to seek out the flaws in our current perception and correct them. Because only accurate information has practical application, then the truth matters. We need to know how to know what the truth really is rather than just believe whatever we want to. So we seek to minimize or eliminate our own biases however we can, following the philosophy of folks like Carl Sagan, who said that there are no sacred truths, that all assumptions must be critically examined, that arguments from authority are worthless, and whatever is inconsistent with the facts, no matter how fond of it we are, must be discarded or revised. We must understand the cosmos as it is and not confuse how it is with how we wish it to be. Whereas the make believer has an entirely different and completely reversed philosophy, thinking backwards effectively. Their philosophy is one which depends on every sort of logical fallacy at once, jumping to unwarranted conclusions which are assumed without reason and defended against all reason because of irrational emotions. And instead of doing any sort of analysis whatsoever, they rely entirely on baseless opinions of erroneously assumed authorities, who obviously and demonstrably don't have any idea what they're talking about. So the question becomes, why should we trust the conclusions of those who are trying to find out what the truth really is over the unwarranted assumptions and biases of those who are determined to make believe illogical nonsense for no good reason, even when they already know that it's not evidently true nor even possible, but they're determined to convince themselves of it anyway.
So in reality, if materialists were right, then they can't even help what they believe, including their belief in materialism.
Once again, we don't have to make believe that reality exists. As the philosopher David Hume pointed out, we have no choice but to accept the evidence of our senses, just as a child or a beast would, because we cannot even function otherwise, and it would be literally madness even to try. So materialism is not a belief like mysticism is. I think that in most cases, we both accept that there is a natural reality, or at least one that is, in any event, inescapably evident and thus does not require faith or belief. But the believers are also positing a supernatural alternative reality, which can only be believed on faith, which they know is unsupported and is thus indefensible. That's why they try to reverse our positions, pretending as if we are they and they are us. We don't believe in a material reality, and neither do they. So there is no belief in materialism, but there is a belief in the immaterial, the mystical. The believers believe in a magical, supernatural, and unbelievers don't. So the burden of proof is not on the unbelievers to prove that magic does not exist. It's up to believers to show that it does.
Yet they often call themselves free thinkers, overlooking the glaring irony. Genuine initiation of thought is an insuperable problem for materialism, as is consciousness itself.
Neither of these present any issue at all for those who do not believe in magical mysticism. Neuroscientists are overwhelmingly atheist. Whether we have free will is a philosophical issue, and many neurophilosophers hold that free will is an illusion. But that is an entirely different topic, unrelated to free thought. Religions are faith-based belief systems with required beliefs and prohibited beliefs, where you are obliged to believe what you're told without deviation and forbidden to believe in certain other things. Integrating your own ideas into that would be heresy. If you change your mind and reject what you once believed, that's apostasy. And if you express your disbelief, that's blasphemy. And all of these have been treated as capital crimes within different faiths. Whereas free thought means that you're allowed to think or believe whatever makes sense to you for whatever reason makes sense to you. You don't even have to defend it. It's one of the most fundamental rights that we humans have, but religion would deny us even that. In fact, the purpose of traditional religion is to manipulate the masses by controlling what they think through the imposition of belief. The Bible and the Quran both equate believing the scriptures to be doing good, and both of them command the killing of the infidel on the word of one or two witnesses. Thus, defense of free thought means allowing people to think or believe whatever they do without punishing them just for disagreeing with you.